Welcome to another chapter of our Marketplace Core Features for Seller Dashboards webinar. Today we'll be going over inventory management. Let's get to it.
So let's talk about and dive into inventory management, right? A significant amount of optimizing, and we've been talking about user experience and the ease of a user to be able to come to your marketplace and find things, right? And there's usually a couple different ways to lead. Multiple paths should lead to the same results, right? Whether they go to the top navigation and hit a category and click on automotive, or whether they go search and type in alternator, or whether they want to go into the catalog and then start filtering on their car model, make, and year and start seeing products. There might be 5, 6, 7 different paths to the same answer. And you need to ensure that when you sit down and design the experience, not only do you work around that data and help those users find the right results, no matter which path they choose to take, a big part of that's the inventory. So I remember one of the clients we worked with that sold railroad ties, right? And they had 11, if I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was like 11 different distribution centers across the US. But they were selling railroad ties mostly to like landscaping companies, but not the small ones you and I would think of. They were selling like 700,000 railroad ties to so-and-so because they're building a new football stadium in Denver. So when they're starting this phase of the construction, obviously it takes a long time to use them all. So they need 50,000 immediately, but the nearest closest warehouse is in Salt Lake. Salt Lake only has 100,000, but they need 700,000. The next closest might be Seattle. So for them, it would be okay because they could order the 50,000 from Salt Lake because that's what they need immediately. They could order the other 600,000 from Seattle and have it coming because they'll be here by the time they need them, but they don't want to run out. They want to make sure they have them because if they don't have that, it blows everything else on the schedule. But if they don't know how many are available in Salt Lake and they just go in and see a massive number and the people supplying that goes, oh, well, we'll fulfill 100 or 50 of them from Salt Lake. We'll send the rest from Seattle. But yet the buyers were all expecting them to be here in the next 4 days. There might be millions of dollars of lost in timing. And that was just this particular client, right? So inventory management is really important on the buyer side. But now all of a sudden you think about it, you own the marketplace and you're now dealing with sellers, and Ron goes in to look for this alternator and there are 7 different sellers selling that same alternator. Do I just say, oh yeah, buy an alternator? What if one can't get me the alternator for 2 weeks, but I need it tomorrow, but only 2 of them offer express shipping? That's stuff that I need to know, right? It's really important to me as a buyer. So I have to have inventory management built into what the sellers and vendors do when they're uploading and maintaining their inventory, and how do they handle. And Chris, I really want you to not only talk about just inventory management in general, but dive into the multi-warehouse, multi-distribution center. How do we deal with the split shipping? You know, Ron goes to said marketplace, I order 3 items. Super simple, right? However, all 3 of those items are from different vendors. So the marketplace has to split that order into 3, send 3 separate orders to 3 separate vendors who are going to ship in 3 different modals. How do we bill Ron for shipping? How do we do ship estimates? There's a lot to unwrap in Ron just buying 3 items, right? 1 item to 2 items can literally change everything, right? Because now I'm talking about multi-vendor on a marketplace, which is a little different than me going on to our local grocery store here in Texas. It's H-E-B, right? We do our weekly order. It's a lot different than me going in there and buying Campbell's soup and a loaf of bread because they're both coming from H-E-B and they're going to deliver it to my house and I schedule that time. So I don't really care. There's no difference in all the different things that I buy in the H-E-B quote unquote marketplace because it's one storefront with one fulfillment and one ship time and one deliverable and one inventory location. All the complexities removed. So now we add all that in and it really has a deep impact on inventory. And that's why we've kind of broken inventory out separately. So I want you to dive in and let's start pulling this apart and talking about the different components of it.
Absolutely. And this is a really interesting topic whenever you get to scale, and it doesn't take long for this to become an issue, depending on your marketplace scenario. Probably the biggest thing here is to break it out into a couple of different chunks to focus on. The first would be making sure that the users have the ability to keep that data updated. This is pretty challenging until you have API integrations, and you probably at least want to be thinking about whether or not API integrations for this inventory updating is a possibility off the shelf. And if it's not, how are you going to get there? Because technically, whenever you're dealing with different sellers that are sort of spread out and handling their fulfillment, you may be helping with the last mile of fulfillment. You may be coordinating with different logistics companies to help your sellers with their fulfillment. A lot of our marketplace scenarios will be such that the sellers themselves don't do much of the logistics, and they pay a fee to a partner that does all of the logistics and fulfillment, once the item gets picked up. Depending on your situation, at the end of the day, the common denominator is what is the inventory and where is it located for these different sellers. And we've got to be able to keep that as up to date as possible. So the first thing is we're getting this data, and whenever there is a sale, whenever there is a transaction, we are inside of the marketplace itself. We are persisting that information. So that is going to stay within the marketplace and decrement from the inventory appropriately, immediately, in real time. Then the other thing that we will do is, depending on the way that the integrations are set up with the sellers, we can essentially make a source of truth selection and allow the seller to make that selection as well. So they can appropriately update not just what the marketplace is tracking, but they can in real time go in and push updates that show other inventory changes that have occurred, either increase or decrease in inventory within their different locations. They can essentially update that in real time using the APIs as well. So this is really powerful. Obviously, the sellers will need to pull data in from their orders. So the panacea and the ideal sort of long-term position to be in is that whenever an order is placed, the marketplace sends that to the seller. The seller can have that integrated to their ERP, warehouse management, accounting system. It's decremented out of that system. They may make several other sales externally in some other format. They push all of their updated inventory to the marketplace, and it's this constant cycle that continues where it's always kept up to date. Now, this needs to include, in many cases, multiple locations. This could be, fulfillment locations. It could be logistics hubs where they can forward the inventory. It just depends on your situation and your scenario. A lot of our marketplaces will be a lot, like a lot of items that are for sale, and they're just temporarily in that one location. And once they're sold, they're gone, and that's it. And so we need to be able to handle all of the different types of scenarios where it might be very temporary and not persistent, or it might be that we have multiple locations all over the world and they're very persistent. Now, the other thing about this inventory piece is, like you mentioned, the logistical side of the lead times. And so based on the proximity to the shipping location and where we're sending everything to, we also want to be able to dynamically present to the user how long each of the tranches of inventory will take lead time wise. So this needs to be something that we can have discrete presentation on based on which lead time amounts we're dealing with and even where they're coming from. Letting the user see this can be really helpful if they're ordering in bulk or they have a really sensitive shipment. So a lot of times it makes sense to present it in a really simple format that isn't overwhelming, and let them expand it and drill down so that they're not presented with something really overwhelming all at once. But ultimately, the point here is that with integrations and making this inventory data available in real time, it's going to dramatically improve the accuracy of this inventory data. Either way, the system that you're working with should decrement appropriately and increment appropriately based on your sellers making updates. And then ultimately, the user needs to be able to see proximity-based lead times with these different shipments based on the different locations and the real actual lead times that are going to occur. Now, one of the, won't go into detail, I'm just going to sort of put it out there, and I know we'll talk about this later, is leveraging machine learning and deep learning so that we can make this even more intelligent. It is really simple to get tabular data, as it's called, around what the fulfillment timeline was estimated to be and lead time was estimated to be and what the actuals were for different sellers, and then present that as sort of like a accuracy score to the buyer. And then in addition to that, sort of like make recommendations to the buyer and the seller about how to handle this interaction. The seller should get notifications. Hey, your lead times are running below, in reality, what you say they are going to, they're taking longer than you say they're going to take. Or you're one of the best. Like you say it's only going to take 3 days and you get it there in one. There are certain things that we can leverage with that kind of feedback loop.
Thanks for watching an episode of our Marketplace Webinar Chapter series. Join Chris and Ron in our next video where they will cover fulfillment logistics. See you there.